All right, so okay, so let's talk specifically about knot tying and some basic knots that every person should know as they're approaching fieldcraft. So as we go through some of these notes, I'm going to talk about some of the specific applications for these knots. But before we do, what we need to do is we need to talk about why it's important to know knots. And so there are many different reasons why to know knots, but there's the two functional ways is that it helps knowing the names of different knots, so that if you need to tell somebody, you need to communicate somebody to do something. Let's say you're on a boat or in an emergency application, that if you say tie a bowline, that the other person knows exactly what you're talking about and what to do. Second is the advantage of this is that if you know how to tie a specific knot, it makes it easier to understand how to untie the knot, which is also important. And then lastly, every time a knot bends, or the rope bends, it's going to weaken the rope. So if you're just putting an overhand knot on top of an overhand knot on top of an overhand knot, it's actually not doing anything in terms of making it that more secure. You're actually weakening the rope. So you want to be able to tie a knot that's going to have the least amount of impact to the rope's strength with the ease of the ability to untie, and be able to then communicate the means in which you're using that knot, if that makes sense. Oftentimes there's two different types of ways in which we're going to learn knots, a proper knot and what's called a hitch. And so the first knot we're going to learn, which most people already may know, is an overhand knot, which is you basically take your rope, remember the running end, and you're going to make a bite. You're going to cross it over, so that's going to become a loop, and you're going to take that running end and you're going to stick it through the loop and pull, and that is your overhand knot. Now it's a knot because it can hold its own. It can hold its own shape, and it doesn't require anything else to hold its shape. A hitch, on the other hand, needs something like this dowel rod to keep its form. So there's a knot called the Lark's head, or a girth hitch, which you're basically going to take a bite of the rope, you're going to bring it around the object that you want to hitch, and you're going to bring the standing end through the bite, and you're going to create this girth hitch or Lark's head. And so this is a very easy, very simple knot. You can, for many different applications. I myself use this quite a bit when you're tying up a bear bag and you're going to throw up a bag into the trees to keep it from the bears. This is a great knot to do that with. But there's many other applications for the overhand knot and the girth hitch. So to learn knots, I certainly recommend having a piece of cordage or rope of some kind. I recommend putting that cordage in your pocket and carrying it with you throughout the day. And when you find that those moments where you have some downtime, you can pull out the rope and start practicing some of the knots that I'm going to teach you and just doing them over and over and over again. You can take this a step further and have a knot party. Bring your friends over and teach them these knots that you're learning, and that's going to help give you repetition, plus you get to drink and hang out with your friends. So one thing that I did to help kind of make knot tying and teaching knot tying a little bit easier is making this knot board, very simple, of dowel rod and some spare wood. Don't have to do anything this fancy, but I wanted to be able to demonstrate the 7 most common knots that you're going to need for your fieldcraft. And those knots are going to be your square knot, your 2/2 hitches, your bowline, your clove hitch, Totline hitch, sheep shank, and the sheep bend, and the timber hitch. So let's get through these knots one by one, and I'll show you how to tie each one of these. The first knot is going to be the square knot. And the square knot is used if you've got two lines or ropes of equal diameter and you need to tie them together to make it longer. You would generally going to use the square knot. And so the square knot is a pretty simple knot to tie. You're going to take the two running ends, run them around each other, and in opposite directions do the same thing. And when you pull it tight, you're going to get a shape in the middle of the knot like a square. So if you push it, hitches. And the 2/2 hitches is used anytime you want to tie a rope around something like a post or a tree that it needs to be fairly secure. So our rope is going to go around whatever it is that we need to tie, and that running end then is going to go through the loop that we just created, creating something like this. And that is what's called a 1/2 hitch. Now the 1/2 hitch isn't terribly secure, so in order to secure it we need another 1/2 hitch. So we're going to take the running end again and we're going to put it through the loop that we had just created. Pull it down nice and snug. We got ourselves 2 1/2 hitches. So we now know another knot. Now the thing about the 2 1/2 hitches is it's a hitch. It can't stand on its own. It can't hold its own without something inside. So let's say if you needed a loop that's going to be permanent, what you're going to want to have is what's called a bowline. And the bowline is going to go an overhand knot. You're going to tie an overhand loop, and then you're going to take your running end and you're going to go through the bottom of that overhand loop, and then it's going to go around the standing end and then back down through the loop, the loop that you just created. And what you're going to see is you're going to see the rope running right around and then down. So the way that you can remember this is this end of the rope is the rabbit. The rabbit comes out of the hole. When rabbits get scared, they run in circles. So he's going to run around the tree and then back through the hole And now you've got a very strong loop that's not going to slip. Okay, so another knot that's really handy is the timber hitch. The timber hitch is great for dragging things. Let's say you find a big log out in the woods and you need to drag it back to camp. Or you're doing some kind of construction work around your place and you need to drag something, move something, a log. Now, obviously, when you're pulling something with great force, it becomes if you use a knot, it's very hard to tie, especially if it's something heavy like a log laying on the ground. And then also after you've pulled it, it becomes very hard to untie that knot, should you have gotten a knot around that. So the timber hitch solves both of these problems. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the rope, run it around whatever object it is that you're going to drag. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, let's take this camera here, I'm going to go around the running end. Oops. To do this. To do this so you can see. This might be a little easier. So I'm going to go around the hitch, and I'm going to take my running end and I'm going to go through that knot. Give myself a little more. And then I'm just going to wrap around the rope, just like this. Okay, so the next knot is what's called the timber hitch. The timber hitch is a great knot to use for moving timber, and that's how it got its name. So if you've got some big, heavy object that you have to pull, you've got two dilemmas. One is you've got to be able to get the rope around that object, and then two is you got to pull that object, and you're going to be putting a lot of tension on that rope, making that knot even harder to untie. So you need to have a good solid knot that's easy to tie around a heavy object and be able to untie it after weight has been put onto it, and that's when we're going to use the timber hitch. So the timber hitch, basically the way that it goes is we're going to take our line and run it across the timber or whatever it is that we want to pull, and then we're going to take that running end and go around the standing end here. And then we're going to take the running end and we're going to go through the standing end and running it around and wrapping it around itself. And so the idea here is that you can see that you're creating an eyelet right here, and then the excess rope is being wrapped around itself. So as friction pulls this, it pulls the rope tighter and tighter, and it's going to be locked around the timber itself, and it's not going to go anywhere. You take the pressure off the knot, and it'll easily be untied. Pretty simple. Okay, so another knot that is really handy to know is what's called the Totline Hitch. The Totline Hitch is great for setting up a tarps with the end of your tent. if you want to adjust the end of the tent. Oftentimes you'll see in a commercial purchase tents, you'll have these little plastic doodads on the end to help adjust the tension. You can get rid of those. You can do that with the Totline hitch, easy enough. So the way that we do that is you wrap your line around a stake or a tree or whatever it is you're going to tie, and then we're going to take the running end and run it 2 loops on the inside of that loop and then 1 on the outside. Pull it tight, and then now you can have a nice adjustable knot that's going to be using friction. It won't slip until you push that knot down or up. So if you're tying up a ridgeline, for example, you can throw 2 half hitches on one side of the rope, and then on the other side of the rope do a Totline hitch to get it nice and taut. So that's the Totline hitch. Next up is the Clove Hitch. Clove Hitch is also very, very handy to know. The Clove Hitch is used in lashing, which we'll do a video on lashing later. It's used for all sorts. All right, now let's say we need to tie 2 pieces of rope together that are different diameter. The square knot's not really going to hold very well, and in this case what we're going to use is the sheet bend. So the thicker of the 2 ropes, we're going to create a bend, we're going to create a bite. And the thinner of the 2 ropes, we're going to take and it's going to run through the middle of the bite. All right, and then we're going to run the rope around the bite, and the thing you want to remember is that it's going to go the opposite direction of the running end of the larger rope, if that makes sense. So I'm going to go around the back of the rope, and then this running end here is going to get tucked in between right there, and then when you pull it nice and tight, it locks it right into place. So I'll show it again. You bite the large end of the rope, small end of the rope goes around the back or the standing end of the rope, or then around the working end of the bigger rope, over the top, under itself, and boom, you got yourself a nice tight rope. All right, then the last piece of tying is what's called the sheet bend. And the sheet bend is basically if you want to have if you have a long piece of rope that you need to make shorter, you can double it up just like this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a half hitch around one side of the rope, and then I'm going to take another half hitch on the other side of the rope. And tension locks that rope together. All right, so the next rope here tie that we're going to do is called the sheep bend. And the sheep bend basically is anything that you want to shorten a rope. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to coil the rope, the end that I don't need, or the rope that I don't need, and I'm going to push it together. And then I'm going to take and make an overhand loop. And I'm going to put that excess material that I just coiled through that loop, and it's going to hold it in place, just like that. Lock that in place. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the other end. So I'm just going to take that end of the rope, twist, give it a twist, push it through that hole, get it nice and snug. Now I don't need to cut any lines that are too long. I can actually shorten them using the sheep shank. And those are the most simple, basic knots that you can use for fieldcraft. If you're interested in more knots, please let me know down below. I'm happy to do a whole session on climbing knots specifically, and then I can do some more what I'll call intermediate knots for fieldcraft as well. Thanks.